Welcome, everybody. My name is Andrew Patricio, and over the last 30 years, I've been a business owner. But many times over the last 30 years, I've traveled to different parts of the world presenting at different conferences. I've presented at conferences and training programs in 22 different countries. So presentations are really key, and it's something that I think you can become better at. I've found that sometimes you'll do a presentation, you do a great job, and you're really proud of yourself. But then other times you do a presentation and you think, I should have thought about that, or I should have thought about that, or then I could have improved. So what I'm going to share with you today are some tips and advice on how we can prepare for our presentations, how we can structure a presentation, and more importantly, how we can improve our presentations. And I'll give you a couple of examples that will hopefully inspire you to get out there and learn how to become a better presenter. So the first thing, and I find this really interesting, is that sometimes people do not know their audiences. And if you don't know your audience in advance, it could be really challenging. And I had a really good example recently. I was at a pitching competition, and these were people that had ideas, they were pitching to get a $10,000 prize. And it was really interesting that there was one young woman that spoke really, really well. I liked her idea, I liked her concept. But the one little mistake she made is that she didn't take her audience into consideration. We were 4 judges, 3 men and a woman. And because her idea was a makeup product, she focused on the woman rather than focusing on each one of the judges. And I think that was one of her problems when she did her presentation. Because if she had have thought about the audience before she did the presentation, she would have probably got the $1,000. So whenever you're going to present to a group, there are a couple of really key things you need to think about. Firstly, who are they? Why are they attending? And what exactly do they want to learn? And the more you focus on this, the better it is. Because you've got to understand your presentation has got to be interesting to the people that are listening to it. Whether it's one person, where you're standing in front of somebody doing a sales pitch, or you're speaking to a group. So remember, there's always, it's about them and not about you. And just think of it, even when we do a sales presentation, if you focus on the customer more than what you can do as a company, they're going to be more impressed because you tailor-make your presentation to suit their needs. And the more you think about this, the better your sales presentation is going to become. So I encourage you, before you start doing a presentation or before you start planning a presentation, get a clear idea of who your audience is going to be. And this is going to make it so much easier. I mean, I had an example yesterday. I do presentations in different cities, sometimes larger cities and sometimes smaller cities. And when I'm doing in smaller cities or smaller towns, I've really got to take the audience into consideration and understand what resources are available to them in the region, and maybe not only focus on large city ideas, but also small city ideas, because this is what they want to listen to. So do your research. The more you know about the area, the more you know about the industry, the more you know about the customer, the more you know about who's going to be attending, the better it is for you. So be inquisitive. And don't rush to create your presentation, but really be inquisitive about who your audience is, where they're from, how they operate, what they want to know, who they are, why they're attending the event. And the more detail you know, the better it is. And you've got to be very, very careful of not assuming things. I've seen this many times over the years, where presenters or salespeople just make assumptions, do a presentation, and really mess it up. And I'm sure I've done a bunch of those in my life too. And this is something you've got to be very, very careful of. The one interesting thing we've learned over the years is that if you have a presentation and one has a really interesting heading and one has a boring heading, the interesting heading is going to grab the attention. And this is really key, especially those of you that are going to be using presentations to draw customers. I mean, a great way to get customers for your business is to run like a free seminar or a free event where you invite people and you speak about, for example, the top 5 reasons they should be using a service like yours, or the top 10 things you should know before you buy this product or this service. These are great opportunities. And you've got to understand that if you can create an interesting headline, this will attract more people to your presentation, to your event. And think about this. Here's a good example. 5 tools business owners use to grow their business online, or some of the things that would be interesting to you and I. Or lose 10 pounds in 10 days. I don't know if that's possible, but you understand that if you're in that situation, if you wanted to lose 10 pounds and you were looking for a solution, this would be something that would attract you. Or 3 ways to break through the noise at a trade show. If you were attending a trade show and you want to learn a little bit about improving what you do at a trade show, this would be really key. So whenever you're coming up with headlines, always think about your audience. And more importantly, think about what would attract them to your presentation. And I'm thinking about doing small group presentations that business owners often do to present their skills or present their product and really educate the customer. And ultimately, that is what a presentation is about. If you're running a seminar to get more leads or to get more customers, your idea here is to educate the customer so they can choose you. And I think this is a key thing, even when you're doing a sales presentation, is think about the customer and think about how you can educate them so that they choose you. And if you focus on this, I think you're going to create a better presentation, because you're creating opportunities for them to educate themselves and for them to realize that you are the right supplier for them. So there's a couple of techniques, but one of the techniques that I have found a lot of really great presenters use is, first of all, to come up with the heading of the presentation they're going to do. And the second one is to develop a presentation outline. And let's say, for example, you were using slides. So if you were using slides, one of the things that you would do is you would, first of all, decide how many slides you're going to be using. And the key here, I think, is you don't want too many slides. I had an example recently that somebody, again, doing a pitching competition, and they had 3 minutes to talk. In 3 minutes, they used about 12 slides, all with bullet points on them, which was really, really crazy. Just be very, very careful of that. Whenever you're doing presentations or you're pitching an idea, if you've got 3 minutes, you're probably going to use only 3 slides. If you've got 10 minutes, probably going to use only 5 slides. You don't want to have too much content. And the other thing is, when you do presentations, visuals are often better than bullet points. I think for some of us, bullet points are just the way we've always done it, and we've got so used to it, and it's difficult to change. But when you're creating a presentation for a group, that's ideally where you want to start. You come up with a really interesting heading. Then you want to think about every slide and think about what points you want to cover on that. For example, if you're talking about presentations, you'll start talking about structure, then you go through the different points. These are the type of things you need to think about. So develop a list of points you want to cover. Let's say I was pitching my idea to raise money for my business. I would speak about the idea, then I would speak about the go-to-market strategy, then I would speak about the how am I going to generate revenue, and then I'm going to speak about my marketing, and then do you understand how you choose key topics to become what you're going to discuss on your slides, and then you flush these out. So develop a list of headings for each one of your slides, and then flush these out with a little bit more detail. But just be very, very careful that you do not put too much content on your slides. I tend to have a bit of a habit of putting too much content on my slides, and usually it's because I'm lazy to create a full presentation and work with pictures and things. So just be very, very careful of that. Some of the basics, and this is a really key thing. I don't know if you've ever been to a presentation and you're sitting down there thinking, and what was the point of that presentation? Just be very, very careful of that. Always focus on your listeners. Understand who's going to be there and what are the key benefits. What things do you want to get across to them that will benefit the listeners? Is it educational? Is it information? Is it helping them make a decision? Whatever it is, you've got to think about these things when you're doing a presentation. And don't include too much detail. Every single one of you have been to these presentations where people have these slides with a small font with lots of content on there, and really it's almost overwhelming. So just be very, very careful of that. Keep it short, to the point, and engaging. And I'm sure some of you have seen these presentations recently where you go to an event and people put very little content on these slides and a lot of pictures. If you can do that, that is even better, because pictures are great in presentations as long as they are relevant. You know, because some people take this too far. I was at a presentation recently, and this guy had really interesting pictures. His presentation style was not that good, and the pictures were not that relevant all the time. So he'd read that book about using really great pictures in your presentation. What he hadn't worked on was his presentation skills. So just be very, very careful of that. The other thing I always recommend, you know, for some people, presenting is very, very nerve-wracking. And this is the way I want you to think of a presentation. It's really a structured conversation more than anything else. So when you're making a conversation or having a discussion with somebody, just be relaxed. Just be relaxed. Use the language you typically speak when you're having a conversation. No fancy language, no fancy terms that you use, and just keep it to the point. And I think this is a really important thing you need to think about. This is a conversation that I'm having with a potential customer, or this is a conversation I'm having with a group of people that could potentially buy my product or service. So those are the basics. Whenever you start a presentation, always think about how you're going to start this, how you're going to introduce it, and there are really powerful ways to do things. One of the things you could start, for example, especially if you're doing a sales presentation, is start with a powerful question. Not something that's too challenging, but asking the customer, do you know how much it costs you to do this? Or do you know how many hours you are spending doing it? Whatever it is, you want to try and come up with a really interesting question so you get people's attention straight away. And if you can involve the audience, this is going to be really helpful. Don't overdo it, but try and involve the audience by asking them a question. The second thing you could do is state an interesting fact. For example, 75% of people are now buying products online, and they're using their phones to do that. You know, these are the type of things that you want to be stating, and if it's relevant to your business and relevant to your customer, it's going to get their attention straight away. One of my favorite ways of starting a presentation is telling a story. And if you're doing a sales presentation, there's a whole lot of options. You can tell a story about a customer, you can tell a story about a situation, how you solved it, but make it really, really interesting. For those of you that are presenting to a group, say of 10 people or 20 people, people love stories. I really think that the more stories you tell, the more interesting it is. And think of it the last time you were in a presentation, that somebody humanized this presentation by telling a story that was really, really interesting that you could relate to. So don't be afraid to use stories or case studies or things like that in your presentation. Another thing you can use is maybe share a quote, not something that I typically do, or use an analogy. But understand that this can be really powerful when you start a presentation. I found typically, especially when you're speaking to a bigger group and you want to get them on your side, it's a great way of getting them on your side and making sure that you understand what their needs are. And this is a powerful thing. For example, there's a quote on the left-hand side here, 79% of people will sign up for a business proposition if you stand up to do a presentation. Again, this could be quite a bold statement you could make to a group, maybe not about presentations, but about something else. And it's interesting to share quotes like that for the reader, because people love numbers. They love it when you can put a number to in your presentation. This is a really key thing. And it'll work for some people and not for everybody. I found over the years, whenever I'm doing a presentation, when people laugh at something you say quite early on, it's very, very comforting for you. It's really comforting. I find some of the most frustrating presentations is when people are far too serious. They really take themselves too serious and don't enjoy what they're doing. So don't be afraid to every now and then, tell a joke or include a little bit of humor in your presentation, but just be very, very careful. You don't want to offend anybody in the audience. So stay away from anything political, stay away from anything gender-based or anything like that. Just enjoy yourself, make people laugh, and it'll make you feel far more comfortable. I find for myself, when I'm presenting, especially to groups, larger groups, maybe 10 or 15 people or 20 people or 40 people, I find that when I do that, it's quite comforting because I feel that they're understanding, they're on my side, and we're going to enjoy this presentation. Because really, I can tell you sometimes, when you start presenting to a group and you look at those people's faces, you think, this is going to be hard. And it's happened to me so many times over the years because I work with so many different groups. But you realize when you insert a bit of humor there or tell a joke, it just relaxes everybody, because really a lot of people get really stressed when it comes to attending seminars or workshops because they expected, I don't know what, sometimes the expectations are really low. They've been to a couple of boring presentations, and it can be really frustrating. So having a bit of humor in your presentation, absolutely brilliant. And if you can do this, why not insert a joke or two in your presentation? As long as you do not offend anybody. That is the key thing. So when you're preparing a presentation, and let me give you an example that I always say to people, is let's say you've gone to an event or gone to a wedding, and somebody said to you, you know what, I just want you to say a couple of words. This is what I would recommend. Whenever anybody says to you, I just want you to say a couple of words, don't just say a couple of words. Rather, prepare a couple of things that you want to say. So use a little piece of paper or a card or a slide or whatever it is, and write down a couple of points that you want to make. I was at an event recently, and it was really, really interesting because I could see this guy was disorganized. And as he was going along, he was, I would say he was winging it. And it was really, really frustrating, because he had some really interesting stuff to say, but he was doing one of those, as he was thinking about what he was going to say. So this is what I'd recommend you do, is whenever you're going to do a presentation, just write down a couple of headlines or a couple of points that you want to make. You can use cards, you can use slides, you can use a whiteboard. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So, but you decide for yourself what is the most convenient for the situation. For example, if you're going to be doing a sales presentation and they don't have a projector or they do not have a whiteboard or whatever it is, that would probably not work. So maybe then you could use a couple of cards that you could use. And one of the questions Michael asked here, should you provide written documentation? And the answer is depends on the presentation. For example, if you don't have any slides or you don't have any whiteboard or stuff, maybe that's a good idea to give people some documentation that they could follow along as you present. But also what you don't want to do is people to focus on your the documentation instead of focusing on you. So really you've got to make a decision. If you don't have too much resources, maybe giving people the documentation up front that they can follow along with could be a good idea. But if you do have slides, leaving it to the end, there's nothing wrong with it. Presenting and then giving them information that they can follow up. There are a couple of really key things, and I think using simple language and no jargon is so important. And you've got to understand the importance of this, because what happens sometimes is that you lose some of the audience. So just be very careful. Do not make assumptions. Do not assume that people know what some of the acronyms are using or some of the language you use, some of the jargon used for specific industries. So really dumb it down for everybody. Not too much, but dumb it down enough so everybody understands in the group. Use personal stories. I think this is a great strategy whenever you're doing a presentation, is to humanize the presentation by telling personal stories. And don't be afraid, for example, to use a little bit of self-deprecating humor every now and then, because it puts you on the same level as everybody there in the audience. And I want you to understand that people like buying from people that they like, that they feel comfortable with, and you want to put yourself on the same level as the people in the audience. So use personal stories, use case studies, give an example. You know, if you say your service is great, give an example of how another customer has used your product or how another customer has used your service. So the customer understands, that the people in the audience understand and really learn from it. The other thing is, when you present, always stand up. If you can, obviously you can't always, but always stand up if you can, look happy, confident, and smile. You know, make sure that you show that you're enjoying what you're doing. There's nothing worse than watching somebody going through the presentation and you can see that they're not enjoying it. It's a painful process. So you don't want to be one of those people. So maybe, for example, before you start your presentation, a couple of things you can do, for example, is, you know, maybe move the muscles on your face so they smile more, maybe a couple of breathing exercises, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Just be relaxed, look happy, confident, and feel comfortable. Smile on a regular basis. The other thing you want to do is use pictures to tell your story. And people love pictures and photographs. Actually, if you could take your own photographs, I think that's even better than using just random pictures that you get off the internet, that you buy on some of these cheaper websites. And this photograph for me is a really interesting one because it's from a trip I made a couple of years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even 9 years ago already. I was in a city called Kaliningrad in Russia. And it's a really interesting part of Russia for me because it's very, very European. But the one thing that you notice and you understand how people struggled through the Soviet times is this is a bridge across a little stream in one of the parts of Kaliningrad. And on this side of the bridge, you have all these buildings built by the Soviets. And really badly constructed buildings. You can see that a lot of the people that were involved in construction of these buildings were doing a job that they didn't like. They were probably underpaid, and they were forced to do what they were doing. And this is on this side of the river. On the other side of the river is these buildings that were built by the Germans before the Second World War. And you can just see the quality. These were people that were craftsmen. They were really good at what they did. They loved their work, and they built great buildings. And it was a really interesting example, you know, when people speak about the Soviet times of how these people were badly treated and the impact it had on some of the things that they did, some of the construction they did, some of the stuff that they built, because they were really treated badly. But anyway, across this river, there's these, and I'm sure some of you have seen them in different parts of the world, are these locks for people that are in love and getting married and things like that, and they had this bridge across it. But this always reminds me of the difference between the communist times when people weren't free and, you know, countries where there's a democracy, the difference between the way people's attitudes and the way they do things. And it was very, very interesting. So get photographs and explain them and use them and can tell a great story. And also a great reminder for you. You don't have to have slides when you're presenting with great photographs, but they really get your memory, they jog your memory, and you can tell a great story around that. The other thing that I've found, and this is really key, and over the last 10, 12 years, I've been doing a lot of webinars and not so many live seminars. And it's really interesting how quickly, as a presenter, you lose your confidence when you don't present regularly. And not so much lose your confidence, you know, you're not as precise and as clear as you should be when you're not presenting on a regular basis. So I encourage you, if you want to improve your presentation skills or your sales skills or your educational skills, is practice over and over again. Get different audiences, you know, get challenging audiences, get audiences that are on your side, get people to ask questions. All those things make you a much better presenter. And you've got to practice, so work on that presentation over and over again. I had a very interesting example. One of my sons, my oldest son, was at a conference in San Francisco last week, the week before. And for like months before it, he was preparing in different audiences, and they'd ask him a question, and they'd ask him why you put that photograph. And it's amazing the work they go through to get these presentations perfect. And really, I encourage you, maybe not perfect, but to practice. The more you practice, the better you're going to become. Also, dress for the occasion. Just be very, very careful. Whenever you're doing a presentation, there's a basic guideline. You will dress just as well as your audience or a little bit better. But make sure that you take the effort. Your shoes are shined, your hair is combed, your jacket is straight, your shirt is ironed. These are some of the things that people notice that are a bit distracting when the presenter is not dressed for the occasion. Keep eye contact. Whenever you're presenting to a group, scan the room. I'm sure it's happened to all of you. You've been to a presentation and a presenter focuses on one side of the audience. Very, very distracting. The nice thing about scanning the room is you pick up a couple of cues, and that's really helpful when you're presenting. The other thing is use gestures, and the more expressive you are, the better it is. Or even better, use a couple of props. Take a few props with you to the presentation because it explains your concept so much better. And I'm sure some of you have seen this where people are doing presentations and they'll have a couple of props. I remember once going to a conference and this guy using a violin, to show different concepts. It was really, really interesting because he kept your attention all the time because you were wondering what was he going to do next. So use gestures, use props when you're doing a presentation. Show examples, demonstrate. These are the type of things you need to use. Another very powerful thing in a presentation is your voice. You don't want to have this monotone voice going through the whole presentation. You want to make sure that sometimes you raise your voice to express a point, or sometimes you lower your voice. Because sometimes when you lower your voice, people concentrate more. So think about this when you're doing your presentation. Raise your voice every now and then, lower your voice when it suits you, but it's interesting to change this on a regular basis. And the other thing you'll notice also, if you've got an audience, which is a very common thing nowadays, a little bit of a distracted audience, if you all of a sudden raise your voice, you'll get their attention if nothing else. So use your voice powerfully. The other thing that works brilliantly, and some people, you've seen these people, they'll make a statement and then they'll just keep quiet. And the interesting thing about that is that if you're speaking to a group and you just keep quiet, you almost force them to concentrate because they're wondering, why did he stop or why did she stop a presentation? So use that when you're doing a presentation. When you've made an interesting point or an interesting comment or this service will save you $7,422 a year, just keep quiet. It's a very powerful thing. So think about this. Expect the unexpected. I can't tell you how many times technology is going to fail you. And for some people, it's really distressing. Actually, interestingly enough, I was thinking about this early on. I've been using WebEx for a long time, and it's always reliable. And today, I don't know what I was doing, and I started the event, closed the event, and restarted. So understand that technology will regularly break down. And expect that. Expect that, actually. So be prepared. When you're carrying your presentation, make sure you take it online. Make sure you have a paper-based version. Make sure you have it on a hard drive. Make sure you have it on a computer, whatever. Think of every single situation. Because even if you're the most experienced presenter in the world, if the technology doesn't work and you don't have a plan B, you're going to panic. And when you panic, the audience notices it straight away. So expect the unexpected. Always take alternative ways to present your presentation, especially if you're going to speak to a bigger group. You don't want to be embarrassed in front of a whole lot of people. And the crazy thing is that once you start feeling uncomfortable in front of a group, you'll start stuttering, you'll start humming, you'll start eyeing, and it'll mess up your whole presentation. So here's a structure you can use. Here's a structure you can use, and if any of you remember in high school or in university when they taught us how to structure our presentations, or I'm trying to think of the word, but whenever we wrote a paper or something like that, they gave us a structure similar to this. And I want you to do the same thing. And I think the key part of any presentation is the opening part, because that's when people are most alert, and the closing. So you've really got to get their attention and make sure that when you close this presentation, you give them the opportunity to take a few takeaways. Yeah, the top 3 things you should have learned today. Thing number 1, thing number 2, and thing number 3. Things like that. That's the way you want to do it. So create a structure that works for you. And you can use this one, for example, 10% opening, or 5 to 10%, 70% of the body, 10% of the closing, and questions. But structured a way that suits you and works for you. Some people, for example, might include more questions in your presentation, which is a really good idea, because then it gives the audience an opportunity to participate in the presentation. Remember that every single one of us are nervous when we're doing presentations. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. And I say this to people on a regular basis, that I've been presenting seminars, workshops, and webinars for 20 years, and I still get nervous. That is a good thing. That is a really good thing, because the day I stop getting nervous is the day that I think I know everything, and I'm not going to try and improve. Nerves are good for you. They make you focus on the audience, they make you think about what you're going to be talking about, and they make you prepare more effectively. So don't worry about being nervous, that's normal. And even sometimes you'll hear people when they start their presentation, you can hear in their voice they're a little bit nervous. People accept that. Audiences are okay with that. As long as the content, the presentation is good, they'll be really happy. Whenever you start a presentation, always greet the group, so hi, welcome, how you doing, whatever it is. Always begin on time. Always, always begin on time. Watch your time. A really good strategy is, for example, to remove your watch and let the audience see that you are watching your time. Nobody's ever going to complain. If you've said, I've got a 30-minute presentation and you take 25 minutes, nobody's ever going to complain. But if you've got a 30-minute time slot and you take 40 minutes, you're going to have a lot of people complaining. Whether this is a sales presentation, whether this is a sales pitch, whatever it is, make sure you understand that. You want to be interesting, you want to have useful content, and always on time. Stick to your topic. Just be very, very careful of going totally off the topic. And people are wondering why. Because, for example, people could ask you a question that could take you off the topic. Stick to the topic, make it interesting, make it engaging. That's what you want to be doing. Just be very careful. Some of us, including myself, when we get excited and if we're passionate about a topic, we often start speaking too fast. Or it could be a little bit of nerves. So just be very, very careful. Make sure you're speaking slowly and clearly. And say to your audience, if there's a term or if there's a word that I use that you do not understand, please ask me. Because it'll happen often, especially me that has an accent, it'll happen often that I'll say something and somebody just doesn't get it. And I can see in their face, that frown, what is this guy saying? And make it clear for them. And sometimes it's just because I'm speaking too fast for their ears. The other thing you can do is interact with your audience. It depends on you. You don't want to put people on a spot, and you've got to be very careful of this. I was working with a group yesterday, and there was one guy I could see was really introverted, and every time I said, I wanted to ask the audience questions, I could see he didn't want me to ask him a question. He didn't want to interact at all. So I didn't ask him any questions because I could see by his body language what was going on. So just be aware of this when you're doing a presentation. You want to interact with the audience, but if you can see somebody's uncomfortable interacting, let them be. It's their choice to not interact if they don't want to. But if you can get some interaction, it's really good. You know, especially if you're doing a sales presentation, if you can get somebody agreeing with you, somebody asking some valid questions, this makes it so much easier. This is a key thing that you've got to be very careful of. If you're going to use visuals, be very careful of not focusing on the audience, but focusing on the visuals. Just be very, very careful of that, because that's what sometimes we do. We turn around, we look at the slides, and we don't focus on the audience. And you've got to be very careful. Sometimes it's because of the venue. You know, if you work in a really small venue, don't have too much space, that makes it a little bit uncomfortable for you. So just be aware of this and think about your audience. Use color whenever you're presenting. Avoid blocking the group's view, which is quite easy to do if you're in quite a confined space. And make sure that you explain graphs and you explain figures. And I encourage you to not use graphs with too much information on. You know, rather a pie chart, or if you're going to be using a graph, it needs to have a little bit of content on there so it's really easy for somebody to read. And this is what's going to happen on a regular basis. You're going to present to audiences that are maybe a little bit short-sighted or whatever it is. And you know what? You lose them if you use slides that have too small of font and things like that, which can be really distracting. This is something really key. I would encourage you to learn your presentation and practice it, but do not read it. It is really, really frustrating when you watch somebody just reading their presentation. You want to maybe memorize key topics and things like that, but you don't want to present it by reading it. Just be casual, make it a conversation, and that's what you need to do. The other thing you've got to be very careful of is pacing up and down. I sometimes overdo this, but again, it depends on the venue. But you want to interact and things like that, but you don't want to be walking too fast up and down. It can become a little bit distracting. This is one of my key things that I do really badly, is sometimes I have keys or money in my pockets, and it can be really distracting for the audience. So just be very, very careful of that. Another one is umming and ahhing. This is one of my key frustrations. But understand that if you're a presenter, you will notice this more than average. So just be very careful. If you and ah every now and then because you're thinking a little bit, that is okay. The problem you have sometimes is that when you and ah too many times, people start assuming that you're not prepared and you're thinking things through. So just be very, very careful. What about questions? I believe that questions can enhance a presentation or really mess it up. So this is what I would encourage you to do. Only answer questions you understand, because every now and then somebody's going to ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it. Just be honest with them. Just be honest with them and say, you know what, I do not have the information about that question now, but just give me your contact details and I'll make sure I do a bit of research. Try and anticipate questions, and I try and do this regularly. Again, my audience is sometimes a little bit different to what you guys will be exposed to, but I try and anticipate questions so that I can explain them in detail and see that I understand some of the challenges they're going through. Only answer relevant questions. Don't ever say something's a stupid question or a silly question. And discourage long-winded questions. Actually say to people, you know, if somebody asks a long-winded question, just say to them, you know what, we're going to try and keep our questions short and to the point because we've got limited time, and that's a key thing. There's nothing more frustrating than somebody asks these long-winded questions. Always be polite, or at least always try to be polite. I'm sure every single one of us at different times in our lives are going to do presentations and irritate one or two people. And there's a couple of options here. One is you can answer questions as you go along, or you can take questions at the end. I find, and this is what I've found with a lot of presenters that I've worked with over the years, is they prefer to complete their presentation and then take questions. Really do what works for you, I think, is the key thing. So take questions, it makes the presentation relevant. Now, for some of you that are going to be pitching your idea, let's say, for example, you're going to pitch your idea to raise money for your business. These are the things that go into a great presentation where you're trying to pitch your idea and maybe raise money. So the first thing they're going to ask is, what problem are you solving? What have you identified in your market, among your customers, in your industry, and what problem are you trying to solve with this product or service of yours? The second thing people are going to ask you, and if any of you have watched shows like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about, is one of the questions they'll ask you is, why should people buy your product or service? What is unique about it? What is different about it? What is special about it? And you've got to have answers for that. But think of it, even when you're doing a sales presentation to one person or two people or a company, this is the thing they are looking for. They want to know, why should we buy your product or service? And you've got to have really key answers. When you're pitching your idea, one of the questions they're going to ask you is, how do you make money? What is your business model? Is it a subscription model? Do they pay you a retainer? Is it cash on delivery? Is it 30 days? Whatever it is. Make sure that it's very clear how you're going to make money out of this business idea. What is your go-to-market plan? So how are you going to get this product onto the market and distributed and sold? And this is a key question for every single one of you, because I want you to understand, I read plans regularly and look at business ideas regularly, and I find that people make too many assumptions when it comes to launching a new product or service. They make too many assumptions about the market. Just be very, very careful of that. Make sure that you have a really key strategy of how you're going to identify people to buy your product or service. Who are your competitors, and what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how you're going to overcome these are some of the things that investors are looking at. The other thing I want to know is, who is the management? So if you're pitching your idea, they want to know, what is your experience in the industry? And if you have no experience in this industry, what are you going to do to overcome this? What people have you employed that have experience in the industry, that are going to advise you, that are going to guide you, that are going to help you manage this business? These are some of the things you need to look at. What are your financial projections? What is your gross profit margin? What are your revenue forecasts? All of these things are key. And what are your accomplishments to date? So I want you to understand, whether you're presenting to one person doing a sales presentation or you're presenting to a group of investors to raise money, the techniques are more or less the same. You want to make it an interesting presentation, you want to make it engaging, you want to get people involved, you want to make it interesting, and if you do that, it's going to really help. So yeah, a couple of final tips, a couple of takeaways for every single one of you when you're presenting. Whenever you present, whether it's a sales presentation or a group presentation, remember it's a conversation. So relax, take it easy, and enjoy yourself. Make sure that you make it interesting. Tell stories, use case studies, use examples that people can relate to, but make it an interesting presentation. So use things like case studies and stories. Very clever way to present, and people can relate to it more. Look at your audience, scan the audience, look at their eyes when you're presenting. Focus on them. Make sure that you get everybody involved. If there are 5 people, you're looking at 5 people. If there are 50 people, you're looking at 50 people. Interact with your audience. Ask them questions, participate, get involved. These are the type of things. Use your hands, use props, make it interesting, and every single one of you have been to these presentations where it's interesting. And for those of you that really want to improve your presentation skills, I encourage you to watch TED videos. TED videos, some of those presenters are absolutely brilliant. They are superb. They get their point across really quickly, and all of us can learn how to do better sales pitches, how to do better sales presentations by watching some of those presentations. Always stick to your time. Never go over time. And remember that practice makes perfect. So practice, practice, practice. And if you do that, your presentations will be better, your sales pitches will be better, and you will generate more sales. So I encourage you to go through this list, to go through these notes, understand what it takes to become a better presenter, and just work on it. Because the best presenter gets the deal. That's what I believe. The best presenter gets the deal. So I encourage you to improve your presentations, go out there, get the deals, and build a successful business. That is my wish for every single one of you.